So we're here this morning with Reynaldo, Piniella, and Andy Jacobson. Reynaldo is an actor, writer, activist. This is from his bio, an educator from East New York, Brooklyn. Uh, he was in the acting company of two Broadway shows at the same time a couple of years ago. Thoughts of a Colored Man and Trouble in Mind. His off-Broadway acting credits include The Death of the Last Black Man, Venus, Skin of Our Teeth, Lockdown, The Space Between the Letters, and The Best of Theater Works. Reynaldo is an inaugural recipient of the All Stars Project's Fellowship for Young Artists of Color, a Freedom Fellow at the Weeksville Heritage Center, and has received residencies from the Public Theater's Shakespeare Initiative and HB Studio. So, good morning, Reynaldo.
Hey, how you doing, Don? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing well. You're quite welcome. It's good to have you here this morning. We have some questions. Just feel free to go in any direction you want with any of these. Well, to start off, what I found most interesting was your activism, and what is some of your activism focused on?
Oh yeah, so a little bit of everything, I would say. I was a fellow with the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures. They have an advocacy leadership institute where they really train Latino artists, Latinx artists in America to advocate for causes that they're passionate about and take those causes all the way to Congress. So I was able to advocate for both arts education and updating the tax code for artists. To members of Congress, specifically Representative Nadia Velasquez from Brooklyn and Representative Jerry Nadler here in Manhattan, where I'm living. Um, Also, I'm a former teacher at Rikers Island Correctional Facility to really advocate that, our incarcerated people have access to arts education the same way that our public school students should as well. And also now, environmental justice is something I'm advocating for with the card game I'm developing with the New Victory Theater.
Okay, that's really actually interesting. Um, the group that you were working with, the end goal was to get to Congress. I find that interesting because a lot of activism, while it's from the heart and it's like a good effort, people find issues of worth. They don't have an end goal that really leads to any change, and that upsets me. It frustrates me, and I think that causes a lot of people to give up with whatever causes they're involved with. So how did you find that the program had a definitive end, whereas you're trying to actually change laws.
Absolutely. For us, we had to do a lot of research to make our activism seem really practical to these members of Congress. So we had to show up at Jerry Nadler's office and say, if you update this tax code for artists, we're able to reinvest that money into our local communities. And then that money will sprinkle down to different aspects of life. We had to learn how to cite different tax codes, talk about co-sponsors of bills. So for us, sure, it's great to get the message out there, but how can we really get to these members of Congress to hopefully make the change we're looking to see?
Okay, and I know it's really just in a couple of sentences, it's not going to be equivalent to being in the program. But is there anything you could say to anyone out there who's trying to advocate for some change and that your program taught you? Just a few quick pointers.
Sure, absolutely. Something the program really taught me was that our representatives in Congress work for us, and that actually, when you hold them accountable, when you work collectively as a community and make your voice heard, these representatives are forced to listen to you. So for us, you could say we're just some artists who are working class. We can't quite donate to their campaigns or make this huge change yet in our communities, but when we collectively work together, we can all make a change we want to see.
Okay, thank you so much. How has living in Brooklyn influenced you? Are you a native Brooklynite or?
I am, yeah. So I really came of age in East New York, Brooklyn, and I would say growing up in East New York was tough. East New York has a really bad rap. Most people know East New York and they think violence. They think a really blighted community. when actually East New York to me was a community that was really working together collectively to support one another. We may not have had, the resources that other communities have in, Manhattan or different parts of Brooklyn, but for us, we were really working together to make sure everyone had food. We
Yeah.
were making sure the kids were staying out of trouble. Um, and it was really great because it felt that we could do anything if we worked together. We weren't looking at what we didn't have. We were looking at all we were creating together. So I think East New York really shaped my artistry in that way. It showed me that our imagination can do anything if we just put our mind to it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think same thing over here in Staten Island, the local communities, people make sure that no one goes hungry. I mean, everyone, we're not at the worst point in time in terms of this. Like, there are programs, but sometimes it doesn't work. And I found the same thing. People, they all care about each other's kids. That's what I think sometimes too, is when kids get in trouble, people outside the community don't realize everybody knows those kids. They knew them from the time they were babies, and like nobody's happy when things go wrong with anyone. So thank you so much for that. Reynaldo, how was it in the world possible, time-wise, to have two roles in two Broadway shows simultaneously? I'm inspired by this just because I like to try and just do a lot. So what skills did you need to hone to work that out? And as you did this day to day, what was your greatest joy as you were
Mm,
in that space?
absolutely. So the skill I had to cultivate the most was discipline,
Okay.
because for an actor on Broadway, regional theater, off Broadway, we're doing 8 shows a week. And doing those 8 shows takes a lot of stamina. You structure your entire day around doing that show. So then when you're doing 2 shows, it's double the work and double the
Wow.
discipline. So for me, I was really grateful to be in two of the Broadway shows that really brought Broadway back after the shutdown due to COVID-19. Trouble in Mind at Roundabout Theater Company, and then Thoughts of a Colored Man, which is playing at the Golden Theater. Um, and both shows were really celebrating and championing the voices of artists of color, um, particularly at a time when our communities were really suffering due to the pandemic. And in Trouble in Mind, I was an understudy, but in Thoughts of a Colored Man, I was a principal actor.
Oh my God.
Um, right. So it was this amazing arrangement where I could go on in Thoughts of a Colored Man as a principal, but if I was needed as an understudy at Roundabout at the American Airlines Theater on 42nd Street, I would have to go there and do that role instead.
Wow.
Right. So it was always that thing of like, what am I doing today? Am I going to be doing this show, or am I going to be rehearsing for this other show? So it was really a magical moment coming out of a time that was really bleak for artists, where we weren't working. Broadway was shut down. So it was an amazing time. I think I'll cherish forever.
Thank you so much. So how was it living in that place of uncertainty? I mean, I think I actually kind of enjoy that in my own life, and I think other people do too, but they might be a little bit afraid of it, like not knowing what's coming next, but there's a certain exhilaration in that.
Absolutely. I would say the time was so full of uncertainty every day just because of the pandemic to begin with.
Right.
We were being tested every day. You were seeing all these different news reports of this show had to shut down because so many actors were sick, they couldn't continue on. Even at Thoughts of a Colored Man, the playwright had to go on for one of the actors with the script in hand because they didn't have enough understudies to cover.
Wow.
So first it was the anxiety of, is the show happening at all due to health? But then the uncertainty as an actor of, first as an understudy, am I going on tonight? Because understudies really are the unsung heroes of Broadway. We have to be ready at a moment's notice. For me, the first time I went on, I had 5 minutes notice. Right. I had never tried on my costume before,
Uh-huh.
had never rehearsed with the principal cast, and then suddenly I was being thrown out there on 42nd Street, and these people paid full price, so they want to see a full performance. So you have that uncertainty, but then the uncertainty with Thoughts of a Colored Man of, for me, I originated that show. And what that means is a lot of these shows have out of town tryouts where they work out the kinks, they figure out, how can we best tell this story before we bring it to a Broadway stage. So for me, doing Thoughts of a Colored Man first in Syracuse at Syracuse stage, and then in Baltimore at Baltimore Center stage, really made me comfortable with the role. I learned a lot so that when I got an opportunity to play that same role on Broadway, um, it was just a lot of fun. So it didn't feel uncertain for me in that respect. It was just more, which theater am I going to be at today?
Okay, and how did this like spill over into the rest of your life? Did it affect other activities or other, perceptions of things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. What's funny is, so I was in these two Broadway shows at the same time, but I also had a play I wrote as a playwright being produced at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, in their Lee Strasberg studio. So not only am I in rehearsals for two Broadway shows, I'm also on Zoom rehearsal for a play at NYU Tisch at night. So it was just this moment of artistic abundance. Um, and actually for me it helped reshape the kind of work I want to be making as an artist overall, because being in two shows as an actor, that were really celebrating my community, but then also the play I wrote at NYU Tisch was called No Shade, and it was about environmental justice, another cause I'm very passionate about. So I think for me it just showed me that there's so many different ways I can make my voice heard as an artist, not just as an actor, not just as a writer.
Okay, thank you so much. Environmental justice is definitely important to me too. And
Mm-hmm.
here on Staten Island, we've actually lost some open space in areas that are like more urban, and that doesn't come back. That's what like I think that like people in the community are upset, but I don't think they're upset enough because the green space doesn't come back. Like once it's covered over and built on, that's it for it. And these are areas that are already very tight. The people need a place to go, and um, yeah, if you want to just speak on that.
Absolutely. The loss of green space, is so connected to the rise in asthma rates in underserved communities. You see the rates of obesity go up when people don't have outdoor space just to exercise and play. Um, so often the loss of green space is also connected to a community becoming a food desert where they don't have access to the same fresh fruits and vegetables as other maybe more well-to-do communities. Um, so for me, growing up in New York City and East New York, we didn't have a lot of green space. We were playing football and baseball on concrete every day. I have the scars on my legs to prove it. So for me in my advocacy work, that's part of the advocacy, is saying how can we plant these trees? How can we actually transform communities? Sometimes through infrastructure like parks. And I think of Staten Island, the transformation of Fresh Kills, for example, from this landfill into something that is now going to turn into green space for communities and also that wildlife to come back as well. So it's a big cause of mine as well to make sure that all people in the city and around the country have that access to green space because it just improves our quality of life.
So yeah, for instance, on Staten Island in Mariners Harbor, right near the Mariners Harbor houses the project over there, right near Arlington. Those are it's housing, but it's private. There's an expansive park, Mariners Marsh, but there's like some kind of environmental issue, so it's been behind a gate for years. So there's a park right here, and no one can go inside it. I mean, kids sneak in because there's ways to get in, but like, it's terrible because it's gone on for over a decade. There was another space right nearby that was it used to be a city park, but in the 70s the city had to sell parcels of land because the city was bankrupt. So a piece of this went, it was debated whether it was necessary wetlands. The state actually kind of changed the definition so that this could be sold, and so that got sold. So, there's places over here where there is abundant space, and even like as of a couple of years ago was even more, but it's not accessible. So in instances like that, I know I'm just giving a very brief outline. What would you suggest?
Absolutely. We're seeing the same thing. I live in Manhattan, grew up in Brooklyn with rezoning, where when communities start to get gentrified, all of a sudden the green space pops up and people have access to those fresh fruits and vegetables, once there's an economic interest in the community. So I think this brings us back to the part of our conversation at the beginning where I talked about talking to your representatives and saying to them that, yes, we want jobs in our community. Yes, we want to make sure we're safe. And also connected to those two things is green space. Because I know for me, as a young person coming up, if I could play after school, if I could be on a team, it kept me out of trouble. It kept me in my books at home as well. So the access to green space has that ripple effect almost through generations because kids are staying in school. they're also they're seeing value in their community as well. They're feeling proud of where they live, because that's something I can say about East New York. I felt very proud to grow up there. Other people thought of it as a community that had a lot of work that needed to be done there. But for me, I saw the resiliency that we had there. So I think access to green space is directly linked to making sure our communities have a bright future.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally relate to that. And seeing what is here as opposed to people looking around and like, just with criticism and be like, you're criticizing, maybe some of those criticisms are valid, but you're missing a lot of good. So thank you so much. The environmental justice card game invites audiences to form new communities to fight for environmental justice while playing a card game modeled after, this is from your own profile, the legendary trading card games Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, losing valuable open green space is always a tragic event. I would even say tragic. I would go that far. Beyond frustration and sadness, well, I kind of asked you this already. Excuse me. I said, what could we do to raise awareness and make direct change? But you've already gotten to that. Thank you. Um, so how do animals and plant life in the forest and the woodlands and the green spaces relate to displaced communities by, say, gentrification?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so often the loss of green space, loss of this forest land, loss of wetlands is directly connected, we know, to climate change and what's happening in the environment and the ripple effect that has in communities that are typically underserved in terms of overflowing sewage systems, in terms of a water supply that is tainted and undrinkable. Um, so I think part of the game as well is showing that some of these issues that we're seeing in coastal communities, seeing in maybe more rural communities, um, actually has a ripple effect down here in the city as well. I think about the changes that are already happening in New York City, where people are talking about building a storm wall to protect Lower Manhattan. I'm not quite hearing that same conversation happening yet for Staten Island. This island community that is very vulnerable to the changes that are happening to the earth. So to go back to your question about the loss of forests and animals, that's going to have a ripple effect directly to us. So it's that warning call, I think, to make sure that we're making the change now as opposed to putting it off for a future generation.
Thank you so much. Um, how does gamifying this topic make a painful reality more tolerable to even look at?
I think gamifying this makes it tolerable because it seems more achievable. So often I get so discouraged by the state of the world in terms of the environment, the state of our political landscape in terms of the disagreement and the lack of bipartisanship we're seeing. So by gamifying it, I'm trying to empower communities to make the change themselves. Yes, it's amazing if our politicians are on board, but what can we do on the local level now to make that ripple effect? For example, there are action cards in my game that players can play to take an action that will help reduce pollution in their community. And one of those actions is talking to a local publication like the Staten Islander, to say, hey, we want to raise awareness about this cause. And then that awareness gets the cause out and has a ripple effect, a domino effect to get more people on board to your cause. So then you can take more actions. So I think gamifying it just shows people that, hey, this isn't something you have to wait for a politician to give you the okay to advocate for. This is something you can start working on today.
I think that's a good point about action and working on it today. Like I was saying before about maybe some heartfelt forms of standing up that may not be effective, and action is the key. And like
Mm-hmm,
what you said before about your own life, about discipline, when you couple discipline with action, I think you have a better chance of getting results. And then,
mm-hmm,
with community, getting other people involved in the same way, it seems like I could go somewhere.
mm-hmm.
Um, did you play Pokemon or watch Pokemon or play Yu-Gi-Oh or collect cards?
Oh yeah, I was an avid Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh player. And what those games really taught me as a young person was resource management, which is maybe not something you would think initially looking at the games. But what I mean by resource management is you have to really strategize, how do I build a team that is supporting each other, that allows me to have the greatest chance of victory um, for each specific scenario. So you're essentially forming a community that's going to fight for your cause to try to be the best Pokemon trainer or Yu-Gi-Oh player in the world. And those card games and video games also are competitive games. So you're doing all this resource management in order to gain victory over the other player. So for me, in making my card game, I was like, okay, but what if we can take that resource management and community building and do it in a way so that players are working together to maybe fight a bigger social cause? So Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh really helped me make the mechanics of the game so that players are able to fight for this cause, but also have fun doing it.
Thank you so much. And I think it's excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me for a moment. Okay, so do you think the practice of joining up with others, all directed toward a common goal, might help some kids do so in real life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because a big part of my card game is making sure that players are forming communities through generations. So it's not just young people playing together. It's not just older people playing together. I really want um, the young child to play the game with their grandparent and figure out how they can work together and how they can form community. Because we know in our communities, you have so many different people from different walks of life. You have the person who maybe is a high school dropout with the person who has a PhD, and how can they fight together for the same cause, and what are the skills that each of them bring that you need, so you're not valuing one more than the other. So that's a big part of our card game, where you're seeing actually sometimes the person who is the greatest value to the movement is the person who's unemployed, and that's not something that we can say sometimes, because we say, well, the person's unemployed, so they don't have maybe a network of coworkers who they can call. But what this unemployed person does have is the time to hand out flyers, the time to make phone calls, the time to do a social media blast. So it's reworking some of the preconceptions we can have about people in our community to show that in order to make the change we want to see in the world, we have to make sure everyone is on board with that cause.
Okay, thank you. And I think it was interesting you said before about it being a game and you can win. I think a lot of times in life, just generally and specifically, we don't see like we don't see it looking like we can win in a situation or something. And this I think resets us like gamifying, I think with in a sense like reset our perception so that we know that there's a possibility of conclusion. Whereas sometimes a situation, an ongoing situation, maybe not the best, after a certain time it could drag on you and you start to feel like, wow, this is eternity, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. How we created the game, we actually deconstructed an environmental justice victory that happened in New Jersey. So in New Jersey and Newark, there's a community called Ironbound, and Ironbound has some of the highest rates of asthma in the entire state, and it's because they have all these power plants that are polluting the air. So this one power plant was up for a permit renewal. So the community took this as their chance to shut the power plant down, or at least put a limit on the amount of emissions that the power plant was emitting. And they did that by taking all these actions I talked about. They marched in the streets, they went to public hearings, they contacted local politicians and newspapers, and they achieved that victory. So for me, I wanted to start from that win to show people that, hey, this community did it. You can do it too.
Okay, thank you so much. And I know we focus mostly on your advocacy, um, but the fact remains, you're a playwright and an actor primarily. I know the advocacy, is a thread running through all this, but do you want to speak at all? No questions, to speak freely on any of that experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think for me, as an actor, sometimes we can feel like we don't really have power to tell the stories we want to tell because we're beholden on someone else giving us an opportunity. So for me, as an actor, I really try to be intentional about the projects that I pursue. so that they're married to the causes I really care about. My last TV job was on the TV show Reservation Dogs, which is on FX and it streams on Hulu. And it's a show that's really celebrating the indigenous community. It takes place on a reservation in Oklahoma, and it follows these young people who are coming of age and dealing with their identity. Um, and for me, being on a show like that, that is celebrating the voices of people who have been so marginalized and so overlooked, felt like a great marrying of both my interest as an actor and my interest as an activist. Um, so that's just one example I can give about like the intentionality I'm bringing to all my work as an actor.
Um, that's about all the questions that I had prepared for you. Um, yeah, I mean, as you were speaking, there were so many questions I could have gone off it too. I think this is just really relevant stuff. It's really important. Like, and I think it's great what you're doing. And I was thinking before, it's almost like you guys are starting up like a Broadway. I was thinking 2.0, but I don't know how many interruptions there were in the past of Broadway where it got a chance to like reset and start off on a new foot. Um, how did it feel at that point where you were starting off again? And I remember for all of us, like when we were all locked down, like it was misery. I mean, some of us knew people that lost their lives, but even just aside from that, losing the basic routine of what kept us, it was almost like you lose your self-identity in the void of just like not having anything to do. So how did it feel at the beginning of that?
At the beginning, to bring it back to a word you used, it was very uncertain because so much of theater in particular is about being in a room together and having a shared experience. But the problem of that naturally with the pandemic is that so many of us were scared to be close to each other because we were worried about getting sick. We were worried about bringing something home to our loved ones. So for us as artists, we were realizing that people had been longing for that catharsis, that 90 minutes plus where they could disconnect and just be in a story. They could see someone sing and dance and feel something. So for us, it really felt like our work was important coming out of the pandemic and the shutdown because we understood how much people had been hurting and how much they miss just being around other people. So as we continue to emerge from the pandemic, it's been really great to see that we're continuing that work of making sure that all voices are heard and celebrated on a Broadway stage.
Okay, thank you. And as far as for any of the kids who happen upon this interview, maybe they find the keyword Pokemon, maybe older people. I mean, it's Pokemon's been around for a bit. Um, in parting, what's the one thing you could say that to help them that in your life, you've learned personally, like your personal insight, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. So in Pokemon, the theme song starts with, I want to be the very best that no one ever was. And I think that drive has given me curiosity, has made me really empathetic, and has also made me an advocate for other people. So I think when I was growing up as a boy, I was taught to step on other people on my way to success, when actually I realized that I can support other people on the way, on that path to victory. So I think that's something that I want to make sure the younger generation gets is that you don't have to look at the world as, dog eat dog, every man for himself. Actually, there's something to be said for all of us supporting each other through our struggles and hopefully to joy and happiness.
Reynaldo, Piniella, thank you so much for joining us here this morning. I'm sure readers and viewers will really appreciate the insights you gave. They're specific to theater, they're specific to environmental justice, to activism, but I think generally it's really good advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.